Hey guys, it's Mr. Mini Painter, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how I painted Renée Montoya from the Batman Gotham City Chronicles game by Monolith. So, as a dedicated GCPD detective and ally to Gotham's heroes, Montoya brings both grit and determination to the tabletop. Her miniature really captures her professional demeanor, practical attire and signature badge, making her a standout figure among Gotham's law enforcement. So I'm going to show you step by step from basing, priming, highlighting, etc. and tips on painting realistic clothing and skin tones and details like her badge or her weapon or her overall pose. The goal is to create a miniature that really reflects her strong personality and dedication to justice. So grab your brushes and it's time to bring Detective Renée Montoya to life in Gotham City. So in most of the comics, Renée Montoya is from Dominican descent, and I tried to approach the correct skin tone for her. So don't blame me if you think it should be otherwise. This for me kind of worked. I started with a mixture of Baylor Brown mixed with some Cadian flesh tones, with about a 50-50 mix. That gives a bit of a darker base tone to start with. In this case, it's the hands and the face. Next, I'm washing that with some Wayland flesh shade. Thin it down a little bit. We don't want any dark puddles, but we want some contrast in there. Next, I'm going over it with pure Cadian flesh tone. Thin that down just a little bit and focus on the highlighted areas, the raised areas. So the forehead, the cheekbones, maybe a jawline, tip of the nose, top of the fingers, etc. Because I'm using a thinned down paint, I usually go over it twice to create the desired effect. I'm repeating this step with Kislev flesh, but decreasing the area I'm painting, so just the very tip of the nose. Just the top of the cheekbones, the jawline, etc. Just to have some gradient in there. Focus on the knuckles, top of the fingers. Now I went a bit out of focus here, but I'm painting in the eyes with palette witch flesh. And there is a tiny bit of teeth showing, which I also painted. I then shaded those teeth with some non-oil to get some shade in the corners of the mouth and really define those teeth. And next I painted in some pupils with Abaddon black. This is always so very satisfying when it actually works. The hair I painted with Corvus black. There is some loose strands of hair hanging over her face, and I also painted some eyebrows to create a bit of a darker look. It's a tiny detail, but I love those tiny details that makes these models a lot more interesting than they already are. Once this has dried, I washed the hair with Null Oil, just to create a subtle definition of shading in there. Once this is done, the highlighting process starts. And I wanted to keep her hair nice and dark, so not too bright, not too much of a reflection. So I used Mechanicus Standard Gray to create some very subtle strands of hair in there. Focusing only on the top of her head and the top of her ponytail on the back. And those loose strands of hair on the forehead. make sure not to go too bright because we want to have her dark-haired. I also used Mechanica Standard Grey on the shirt. She's wearing a plain grey shirt below her jacket. Once that dried, I washed that with some Nol to create some definition and some detail in there and create some shaded areas alongside the coat. The coat itself I painted with Black Legion, which is the darkest of contrast paints. It's a nice and quick, efficient way to paint large black surfaces because it instantly creates some shades and highlights. If you want to go traditional, just go with some Abaddon Black, for example, and build it up from there. Now for the highlights of this coat, I'm using Abaddon Black and a mixture of Mechanica Standard Grey, just to have a slightly brighter gradient and give it some edge highlights here and there. Focus on the edges of the coat, the top of the arms, the shoulder. Follow those lines in there. Next, it's time for the badge. It's one of those things that really characterize this model. I'm using Retributor armor to create a nice, shiny, golden badge. For the gun, I'm using a mixture of Iron Warriors with Abaddon Black to give it a dark metallic look. You still want to be able to see some details, but I didn't want it to be too bright. Next, it's time for some washes, some Reikland Flash Shade for the gold part, to pick out those details. And for the weapon, I'm using Nuln Oil. There's some tiny details on there that really work better when shaded. Then we're going for the weathered jeans look, and for that I'm using Eloitic Blue as a very nice bright starting color. I wanted to give her these old worn jeans, light blue jeans look. I'm going to show you how I did it. Before continuing on the pants, I'm letting it dry. I'm painting the shoes with grey cere. She's wearing white sneakers. And we're going to give it a base coat while this pants is drying. Next, we're continuing on the pants with some Calgar Blue, which is slightly brighter than we used before, and I'm focusing on those raised areas and leaving the shaded areas. So for example, the middle of this pants here, a bit darker, so you get some definition in there. Now I'm going to give it some edge highlights with Fenrisian Grey, focusing only on those strong, visible folds and curves. Define those first. So pick out those lines, those folds that are really, really visible. And next, with a dry brush, I'm kind of going all over the pants to give it that worn look, that light, stonewashed look. And that also blends the outlines we did before together. Now the sneakers I gave a shade with some Apothecary White, because Apothecary White is slightly brighter than, for example, Nuln Oil. It doesn't give that strong shade, but very subtle, and it really works with those bright grey colors. All that's left now is the base, Mechanica Standard Grey. Now I always like my bases to be a little bit dirtied up, so first I'm using Nuln Oil, quite heavy. Putting that all around, making sure not to spoil the shoes we just did. And while this is wet, I'm going over it with some Agrax Earth Shade, or Coelia Green Shade, or Athonian Camo Shade. Whatever you have lying around, just to dirty up that base. Kind of blend it with the wet brown look. And once that is dry, you have some dirty spots in there, which I'm going to dry brush with some grey cere to kind of blend it all together and create some sharpness and edginess to it. And there's your base. And there's your model. And there she is, Renée Montoya. I think she's really fierce and brave looking with her gun at the ready, just about to jump into the action. I hope this video was of any help to you guys, and if it was, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. And consider following me on both my YouTube and my Patreon page. For now, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in one of my next videos. Bye bye!